It's my pleasure to present to y'all. I had the pleasure, I'll put it that way, of this weekend previewing what these two ladies have put together for us to see today. And I don't think there's any embellishment in saying that I think you're going to be very impressed by what they put together. I'm going to wrap it up at the end before we do Q&A. I'm going to drill down just like a couple of slides, but I'm also providing some more specific data that's going to be posted by tomorrow, I hope, for y'all to go in and actually see what I'm going to be referring to in kind of the macro view. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Lanet and Elizabeth take most of the time out of this next hour for their presentation.
Thank you so much for inviting us to come. I think this is something that Lanet and I are both personally very passionate about. And we're just...
Should be the first PowerPoint.
Perfect.
There you go.
And I think I can speak for both of us that we feel very blessed that we get to do this on a daily basis. And that this is somehow a part of our job. Like, people pay us to do this. I can't believe it. It's amazing. But, yes, we just wanted to give you a quick update, talk a little bit about what some of the pre-K through 12 and post-secondary issues that popped up during legislative session, but then also talk a little bit about how the chamber engaged in that and the work that we do. But first, I thought it might be helpful because not everyone knows a lot about the legislature. So I like to do a quick rundown of just kind of the basics. So our legislature in Texas meets every other year, which is both kind of a good and a bad thing. It's nice that we only have to kind of deal with it every other year, but also that means that every session is so important because we're planning for the next 2 years of our state. So this past session was the 85th legislative session. There are 150 House Representative members and 31 Senate members. And so I have a link at the bottom. The Texas Tribune is a really wonderful resource just for daily news, but also for the legislature. So they actually have some really cool videos that once we send this out, if you are just like, I need to know more about how this works, they go through kind of the old-fashioned, like, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. Yeah, so that's super helpful, and we'll send this out. The leadership that we have in Texas, you probably are familiar with our governor, Greg Abbott, but a few other leaders that are really important are Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who oversees the Senate, and then Speaker Joe Strauss, who oversees the House. So they're the leadership in those two houses, and then they work with the governor to really figure out what are our state's priorities and how do we get them passed. We also thought it might be really beneficial to look at the different education committees. So within the legislature, there are different committees where a lot of the work really happens. This is where the bills are discussed, where they're filed. This is where there's public hearings. So that means that any citizen of the state of Texas can come and tell the committee how they feel about something. You can go, students can go. It's really a cool thing, but a lot of people don't know, and it can be really intimidating to go up there and speak, but it's absolutely your right and something that is encouraged. So we've also highlighted in red those that are from North Texas. And I think that's really important because last session we had a situation where there is a public education committee that had 0 North Texas representation. So that means that we don't have direct relationships with our representatives and senators to advocate for Dallas. So it made our job a lot harder. Then if you're looking at the House, so there's a Senate Education Committee, a House Education Committee, both for public ed and higher ed. You can see a few others. Appropriations is also a really, really, really important role to have, and we were very lucky to have both Helen Giddings and Linda Coop. And then here are the House and Senate Higher Education. So, yeah. Any questions? That's like super fast. Any questions just about how the legislature works, what it means, what it looks like? Okay, great. So we're gonna jump in a little bit more about specific issues. So for this session, we heard even a year in advance, this is gonna be a lean session. a lean session, which is a really nice way of saying there's not a lot of money at all. We even saw this a few months before the session from the Texas Tribune that the state leaders asked all agencies to cut their budgets by 4%. And so that really set the stage for this session. And if you can imagine in education, a lot of what we do has to do with funding. And so it makes it a lot harder to ask for additional funding or to increase different things. So a little bit about the budget. Like we said, in red, tight budget. The revenue was down about $8 billion for the biennium for the 2 years. And the House and Senate create different budgets to propose, and there was such a stark difference in both of them. Within the Senate, they were cutting certain things. In the House, they wanted to pull from the rainy day fund. It was just a battle over the budget. A little bit specifically about higher education in the budget. Although we did see technically an overall increase of 1.6%, it did not account for the rising enrollment in our universities. So we at the Chamber are very aware that while on the surface it kind of looks like, yeah, we got more money, that's not the full story. Also going into this session for higher education, it was a really stressful session. Walking into it, we were hearing from our legislators that things were going to be cut across the board. In the Senate budget, we thought all special items were going to be cut, which included funding for programs and for certain things. And we also even heard, like a great example is UT Southwestern here in the North Texas region. They were facing cuts of up to 40%. And if you think of any organization losing 40% of their funding, that is ridiculous. So we were lucky to come out of it and have a huge sigh of relief after the session when UT Southwestern did not face any cuts, and that really we only saw these issues. But by no means does that mean that everything is sunshine and rainbows and perfect. Something that was a huge win that we really want to celebrate, especially in a session like this, was that we did see an increase in student financial aid, which is something the Chamber every single session advocates for. There's a 10% increase in the Texas grant funding, which really helps students that are trying to attend a four-year institution. It's also the only form of government financial aid that goes to undocumented students, which is also very important. And then we saw, currently, there are eligible students in the state of Texas. Before this increase, only 85% of the total eligible students in Texas were getting funded. With this bump now, it's 92. Still not to 100, but I think that's a huge one that we should celebrate. And again, the special items were not cut. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lanet to talk a little bit more about how the budget interacted with public education.
All right, which one of these am I pushing? That one?
Great, yeah. Sorry.
I have to rely on my millennials for technology, you know. So really the same thing happened in public ed when we started this session, in that we knew it was going to be an extremely tight budget session. As you'll recall, we were coming off of the Texas Supreme Court telling us that the public education finance system is broken, antiquated, outdated. There are all kinds of sad words that they used to tell us how bad it was, but that they were not, for the first time in recent history, going to make a ruling on what should be done. They were going to pitch it back to the legislature to take that activity and to fulfill their responsibility. So we knew going into it. So there are lots of things on this slides. There are a lot of numbers, but a couple of the key numbers is that the funding was down from the general revenue budget from 35.5 billion to 34.4 billion. There was a small increase in one of the really technical aspects of the public school finance formula called the Austin yield. Those of you that work in school finance know that the property values in the system are based on the Austin ISD property values, and when that goes up, then there's a little dollars that go up. So there were a few districts across the state that are in that category that got a little bit of additional money. For example, in Dallas ISD, it was $92 a student, but not all districts across the state got that. There always is money put into the budget. In this case, it was $2.78 billion to cover the cost of anticipated growth. In Texas, our school system grows about 160,000 students a year, the size of Dallas ISD in 2 years across the state. And that's one of the catches that we always hear. You will always hear your legislators tell us that, oh, we put more money into public education this year than any other session. Well, that's because of the growth factor. And they're obligated by law and Constitution to do that. And so sometimes that's a bit of a misrepresentation. The biggest disappointment was there was no increase in the basic allotment, which was what we really tried and fought hard for. And then the other biggest disappointment, even though it was a really small amount of money, was losing the $148 million that we won in the previous session for the pre-K grants. What was House Bill 4, and there was also some supplemental money that they ended up taking away, and that was a big loss, even though it was a small amount of money in terms of impact across our state. The end result was all of that was $1.2 billion less in the public education system. And it means that across the state, instead of the state funding 38% of our system from the state revenue, now they only fund 37%. Then that means that the 63% of the revenue comes from local property taxes. Those, again, these are just some numbers that basically shows you that the funding went down by $339 per student as an average. Obviously, different districts are impacted a little bit differently. And we just want you to remember in the system itself, what happens is when local property values rise, which they have consistently done over the last 7 or 8 years, the money going into the system from local property taxes rises, and therefore the state chooses to decrease the level of funding that they put into the system. And that's where it's gotten skewed. In the early 90s, we had about 50-50 trade-off. The state paid about 50% and local property taxes paid about 50%. That has just decreased dramatically. And it's going to continue to create that skew until they fix the system. We know that there are property wealthy districts and there are property poor districts, and those are impacted by recapture, and the recapture dollars is impacted also by that shift in local property tax. This is just a visual that shows you how dramatically over the last numbers of years that the state's share has actually decreased and what that impact looks like to our system. I'm going to quickly touch on a couple of higher ed workforce issues that Elizabeth's going to come back and talk about in a few minutes. One was she talked about funding. These are overall. She's going to talk a little bit more about the PTEC bill that passed at the state level, and then some transfer and articulation issues that specifically that they work through. Are you coming back to do this, or am I?
You do PTEC.
Okay, I'm going to do PTEC. All right. We have this, sideshow here. This is this bill was really impactful across the state in terms of what future impact it has. It only has $5 billion worth of, not $5 billion, $5 million worth of money in it. $5 million worth of money in it. But this is, the PTEC stands for Pathways to Technology in Education, in early college high schools. Pathways to Technology in Early College High Schools. It's a model that was created with the New York School Systems and IBM a number of years ago that actually creates an early college high school based on actual workforce streams and data that are needed in that particular area. The champion of those right now in the state is Dallas ISD, and the Dallas County Community College District have worked together now to open 18 of those particular campuses. But this is a model that our state hopes to increase and move forward. And what this bill did was create a structure statewide, a committee that can look at that, can organize that, and a little bit of money to help moving that initiative forward. And it also created an opportunity for some insurance benefits for companies and students that are and school districts and community colleges that are involved in it, to make sure that when they're working specifically with industry, that those students and the industry are both protected. So Elizabeth's going to come back and talk about higher education and transfer.
Great, thank you, Lanet. So as you see, we're switching off because primarily she works on public ed and I work on higher ed, so thank you for our switch off. So another huge issue, which I think is perfect, because this is actually what was discussed at the last council meeting, whenever we had Rex Peoples from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I was really excited to be there because transfer and articulation is something that the chamber is really invested in, and it was something that he also, from the coordinating board side, was saying it was a pressing issue that they wanted to address. So for those of you who may not know, transfer and articulation is helping students transfer college credits, whether that be from a 2-year to 4-year institution, early college, high school, to any higher education institution, or even going from 4-year to 2-year. There are all different kinds of directions that you can go with transfer. And so probably about almost 2 years ago now, at the chamber, we have something called the University CEO Council, which is where the largest regional college universities, their presidents or chancellors come together quarterly in our offices to talk about what are the pressing issues in higher education. And one of them, which I was very excited about, was transfer. They all agreed that it was an important issue that we needed to be working on both regionally. I went to TWU last week. I'm going to Commerce today. I love my job. I get to travel everywhere. But also legislatively, how can we engage in this? So something that was also really, really exciting is during a Senate Finance hearing, it came up the important issue of transfer. Senator Jane Nelson, Senator Royce West, and a few others said, you know, we've been talking about this for 20 years. What are we going to do about it? So we're really excited with the leadership of Senator Royce West from Dallas, North Texas. He chaired a Senate Finance working group that really focused on how do we legislatively address transfer. Our one and only Barbara Lerner was on that working group, as were other individuals from the region, and the chamber engaged in it by submitting recommendations from the work that we were doing, what we were seeing, and 4 different pieces of legislation came out of that. Unfortunately, only one of them passed, but you know, one passed, so we're going to take it. But the one that the chamber was really supporting was SB 2086, which really mirrored the work that we were already doing in the North Texas region, whether it's through the Community College Consortium or other things. It was really it would take the state and create different regions, and they would, within the regions, there would be one policy for transfer for students. So rather than saying, oh, I may want to go to this institution, this one, that are all within the North Texas region, they would only have to worry about if things would transfer based on, oh, I want to go somewhere in Houston, or I want to go somewhere in a different region. So we engaged in that, supported it. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but the one transfer bill that did pass was Senate Bill 802, which this actually created a study, an interim study before the next session to say what are best practices, what are issues, how can it be legislative solved, things like this. Although, you know, we can be a little disappointed that it's not more actionable, it is still good that there is going to be a conversation, and this also provides an opportunity for people in this room as well as the chamber to continue to engage in it. And so we are doing the best we can to listen to our institutions, so that way we can go to Senator Royce West and other leaders to say, this is what we're seeing in North Texas and these are our recommendations. A few other higher education topics that were very sometimes controversial or brought up. One was tuition freeze. I think that's something that's always a hot topic issue. That did not pass. Performance-based tuition did not pass. And another one is community college baccalaureate degrees. So there were 2 that were filed specifically for Dallas County Community College District to offer a 4-year baccalaureate in early childhood education. So both of those did not pass, although there was a separate bill that did pass that was more encompassing of all community colleges and within different areas. So I believe it's for the applied associates to go to. And so within that, we can fit early childhood in there. So that was a really big topic that was happening, and the Commit Partnership really led that effort, which I'm happy to connect anyone to them if they have other questions about that. Some other things were tuition set-asides, if you maybe heard that buzzword, which was really, which did not pass because it was going to be taking a large chunk of money away from our most low socioeconomic students. So yeah, I'm going to pass it back off to Lynette for public education.
So these are the topics that going into the session that we identified that we thought were going to be hot topics, and some proved to be and some others. They also are the ones that we at the chamber were working sort of mostly on. And just to pause for a minute and tell you, some of you may question and wonder, why does a chamber get involved in education and in particular in policy? And it's because that we really feel like that the education, that the business community is the ultimate consumer. The business community is the group that is working toward and using the talent that the education pipeline creates and presents to us. So it is an aspect of work that we take very dearly and we involve in, and we try very hard to be the business voice in that pipeline all the way through. And so these are the issues that we identified as being significant to our business community and that we've worked through. Now, they all are significant to all of you too, but we talked about in the budget about the school finance bill. It was House Bill 21, and it did not pass. It had some very significant differences. The House had about $1.8 billion built into that budget, which would have been a basic allotment increase and some refinements to the system. The Senate only had $350 million proposed, and ultimately they clearly could not reach consensus, and it did not pass in the regular session. The House Bill 22 was the refinements to the A through F accountability system. Those of you that are working on the public ed side know that that's coming and coming soon, and that in the early days of the commissioner rules and working through that system after it was passed in the last legislative session, it definitely needed some refinements, and this was we thought was a positive bill. There are some things in it that still I know our ISD partners would prefer that were not in there, but there are some improvements. From the business community standpoint, we hold really strong and care about accountability and believe that we have to have accountability from a financial and from an academic standpoint. We were pleased that this did not delay the system of accountability, and again, I know our ISD partners probably would have a different opinion about that, but it will help that system move forward. The other thing that we were really excited about was this House Bill 2039, which created an optional early childhood through third grade certificate. Texas was the only state, I think, that did not have that ability for teachers and educators to focus on early education and become specialists in that area. This bill is a little bit broader. Besides that, it has some reciprocity opportunities for educators coming from other states, and it also has a piece in it that will track the effectiveness of educator prep programs and whether or not their teachers are really moving through the system and being effective in their classrooms. So we feel like it's a real positive move for our state to have that piece. House Bill 515 was a testing bill. One of the things that happened in this session that we sort of anticipated, but it was much broader than we saw it move, was that there is a huge now movement among parents particularly, and certainly some of the education and the ISD partners themselves, to reform all of the testing and the ability to make it more meaningful and to make it less impactful on students and in the classroom a little bit. This bill was a massive bill that would have changed very specifically what would have actually eliminated testing in the 3rd through 8th grades, except what was required by ESSA, by federal law. It would have eliminated writing. It would have done some really severe things. It did pass in the House, and rather, I think almost unanimously, it did not pass in the Senate. And I will tell you, again, our ISD partners, I think, would love to have had that reformed. The business community stance is that we need some form of accountability. I think we recognize that it needs to be reformed, and that maybe testing has created an impact in the classroom that that certainly we need to work through and make sure that it has a little bit less impact. But it did not pass, and that was something that we are going to know that is going to continue to come up as we go through the next session already. There will continue to be cries for that system to be reformed in some way. We also had a big movement this session on what was called at the Senate level school choice, or those of us that have been working in the system for a long time called it vouchers, but it was a movement to take away from the public ed system and specifically use it for private school and for a variety of other alternatives, things even like special ed use, mentoring, all kinds of different things that was in this bill. We felt really positive that we managed to get out of this session without a bill that was going to take money out of our public ed system, and that is going to continue to go forward. We also were very pleased that we did not end up with a bathroom bill that was going to impact schools. As that worked, if you follow that issue as it worked its way through the session, it really became, because it was not feasible that it could be passed at the state level, the business community fought back so hard against it that it became targeted on governments and schools, and to have that opportunity to let school districts and entities that have been taking care of that issue very thoughtfully and very confidently and very privately for many years, to have that continue, we were pleased about. This was a bill, let me see, oh yeah, this was a bill that we really wished would have passed. This was a bill that would have impacted pre-K, that would have given those districts that are investing in the second half of full-day pre-K on their own the opportunity to count those students as full-day students in their WADA calculation for state public ed. It would have been a real help for those districts. It didn't pass. And then this bill, the 1333, was a movement that you may have heard about called taxparency from a lot of parent and independent and ISD groups that were looking for the opportunity for citizens to understand more about how their dollars are used by the state, and that many of the dollars that are actually collected under local property tax revenue under the public ed system are actually used by the state in other avenues of the budget. You're going to hear more about this. This is a group that continues to move forward, and unfortunately it didn't pass either. Then we move to the special session, which was something that, if you followed it, the governor called the special session. He's the only one that has the power to do that. He specifically called it because there were a couple sunset bills that related to medical issues that didn't pass in the regular session that were required to pass. But then he added on 20 other provisions that once those bills were able to consider, were dealt with, and they could move forward. One of the positive things that happened, although it happened at the 12th hour and it was very small, was that House Bill 21, the school finance bill, actually was reintroduced, and it did pass. It was very different, in that, and it has some real specific things in it. It's about $563 million. It's deferred money from Health and Human Services dollars, so it's kind of fake money. It's kind of pretend accounting. It's kind of an accounting trick money that they'll catch up with it. Over $212 million of that was for retired teachers insurance premiums, which was again something that they fought really hard for in the special session. The other pieces you can see, there are some really targeted things. Probably the most unique one that's new was $60 million for facilities for charter schools. That's the first time in this state that has come through. Most of these are really targeted, finite areas that didn't really impact many of our districts in North Texas, although some of the charter schools certainly will be. But I think that the significant thing about this was it was the first time in recent history that the Senate and the House actually agreed on anything that had to do with school finance, and that actually put some dollars into the public ed system that were unique and different than what they were required to do. And we know that's going to continue to go forward. We thought it would be helpful real quickly to give you a little bit of understanding about the impact of what's happened with Hurricane Harvey, particularly because it is going to dramatically impact what's going to happen with the school finance system going forward. Let me back up. The other thing I forgot to mention in this bill was that it created a statewide commission to study school finance. And we had some promising hopes for that. Only one business person is on that, which was sad for us, but that commission now is going to end up focusing, unfortunately, probably on some of the issues that are going to be needed to recover from the financial impact of Harvey. So this just tells you a little bit that basically about 1/5 to 1/4 of the students in the state and the districts have been impacted by Harvey. We all know about the snapshot day in October, where those days are going to be snapshot for financial accountability and academic accountability, and the movement of students around and those districts that are still closed or still struggling to open could really impact what that looks like. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. This shows you that, again, just the number of kids that were impacted. It's just a really quick visual. 6 in 10 of those students that were impacted are in that economically disadvantaged category. And this also shows you some of the school districts that were severely impacted by Harvey, some of which are still not open. Aransas Pass and Aransas County have declared that they're going to shut for the whole year. Beaumont and Corpus and some of those others are just struggling really, really desperately to get that system. And only some of those districts have just started back in this last week, and some of them are still doing part-time. This impact on teachers, we know specifically that the teachers have impacted personally as families. families. They are also impacted from those districts where they may have to, that they don't have a job right now because the district's not open, or that they have relocated themselves to somewhere else with their family. And it shows you also, all these little houses will show you the amount of the facilities. So and we just picked Houston ISD as an example because of the dramatic impact. Houston ISD has about 400 buildings, and 200 of those had standing water, 53 of them had major damage, and 23 of them had severe damage, just as an example to show you. You all understand and know what happens when facilities get impacted. They have there are all kinds of things that replace textbooks only once every 10 years, but there are districts that lost all of their textbooks, and think about what that allocation looks like. This is in there, and the key thing on this slide really helps you understand what we foresee as some of the impact that's going to happen as a result of all the damage in South Texas. Is the property values are most likely going to go down. And most of our school districts have built their budgets. In fact, all of them have built their budgets on those proposed increases of 7 or 8%, which have been high over the years. Even if that drops a percentage, it's multi-million dollars worth of loss in those particular districts. So we could end up very much having that 63% of local budgets focused, and then one of the other big issues that people are going to be really talking about is the recapture. Houston ISD pays the second largest recapture bill in the state, next to Austin ISD. They pay about $200 million in recapture. And if their property values go down, then they're not going to pay as much money into the state, and then there's going to be a hole in that state budget dollars that the state's going to have to come up with somehow to provide for those districts that have been receiving that assistance. There was also some news that came out this weekend that there is a state law, which I don't think any of us knew about until the Houston superintendent discovered it, that says, and it was passed in the 1990s, that a district that suffers severe loss like this in a tragedy, in a natural tragedy, can use some of their recapture dollars as recovery dollars. So it could be that those dollars go down even more. It's certainly going to be helpful to Houston ISD and those districts that are property value rich districts that are recovering. But again, it's going to create a big loss. These are some of those short-term things we know: transportation, food costs. Those districts that have taken in students that are just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, and when it takes quite some time to true up those dollars from the recovery dollars that come from the state and the federal government. And then that short-term impact on just the property values alone. Think about when those bills go out on January the 1st, because the many people now are going to, a lot more people will protest those bills because their property values may have changed. Not only is that going to decrease the dollars that come back into the system, but it delays the payments to our ISDs, as they usually get those dollars in January and February as they're operating their budgets on their fund balance a lot of times until they get those. So those dollars could go down, and that could be a big impact. These are the long-term impacts, and I think we've covered most of them. But part of that is just going back and figuring out, how do we match students back up? Are they going to return? Or in this case, probably most of the students will return back to the districts they came from. But what happens along the way, and how do we true up those dollars? And that long-term impact on school finance is going to be big. And one of the biggest disappointments is that we had made progress. We'd actually gotten both the House and the Senate to agree that they needed to move forward in refining that system. And now we feel like that many of those conversations will get delayed because of the need and the impact of this. One of the things that we do at the Chamber, can we do this?
Sure.
Okay, is we have actually an accountability index that we have a legislative agenda that is involved with a number of issues outside of education. It's water and transportation and economic development and taxation and those kinds of things. And we have an actual agenda that our business members adopt. And during the course of the session, along with the Fort Worth Chamber, we track how our legislators vote, and we report out to our members and to the citizens how they voted on those agendas that are important to us. You can find this online on our Dallas Chamber website and on the Fort Worth ISD Chamber website. That just shows you one of the things you'll notice when you look at the education section is that very few of the senators in Texas voted for the issues that we support at the chamber level. There is also, if you really are policy wonk, on our website, we have a weekly update that tells you exactly what happened during every week in the session that you can go back and look at. This is a resource that we recommend, this Texas Online, Legislature Online, that you can follow bills. You can go in and look at them now. You can read text and see. And then also you can obviously go to Dallas County elections and see that part and see, let me back up. You want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. So kind of as we're going through everything, I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. Some are successes, some are not. And as Lanet said, if you're looking at this, the sheer fact that whenever, I mean, that's not meant to read, I understand that, but whenever you see it, how many of our representatives voted against the interest of us as education administrative people. And that's why we wanted to make sure that Dallas County Votes is on here, because voting is so important. Voting is so important. And not only voting in the November elections, but also voting in the primaries. We found that here in the North Texas region, typically elections are won in the primaries. Particularly when you have a district that is primarily blue or primarily red, that's when you really need to go out and vote. But a lot of times those are also the easiest to miss because they happen in the spring. They're not your normal, like, first Tuesday in November. But this is something that the chamber has really invested in, and it's something that's very important to us. Lanet and I are both registered we're deputized to register people to vote. We're trying to get the word out. The chamber does not endorse any candidates, but we do endorse everyone voting. And so I've gone to different college campuses to register students to vote. We can come to your office to help your colleagues register to vote. But if you don't know if you are registered to vote or where or what's going on, you can always go to Dallas County Votes if you're in Dallas County. There's also one for Denton, Tarrant. All of the counties have where you can just plug in your name and your address and it'll tell you if you're registered to vote or not. If you've moved recently, you have to update your voter registration, all of that stuff. And unfortunately, you can't just do it online. You have to either print something off online and mail it in, or you have to find someone like us. So we just want to emphasize that and how important it is. We hope that you'll utilize the chamber as a resource to better educate you on who you want to vote for, whether it be through our weekly updates or Legislative Accountability Index, or even just like talking to Lanet and I. We're always happy to meet with anyone. Honestly, if you work for an institution, you're probably a member of the chamber. Just hearing everyone, I'm like, oh, they're chamber members. So, and if you're not, then we can check for you. So, yeah, voting is really important to me. That's a very personal thing for me.
I guess we can do questions.
Or I don't know, Don.
You want to do your things first?
Yeah. Sure.
One thing that we left for you on your looks like this, which is just a one-page sort of snapshot of those key bills that we identified that we were involved in, and what the outcomes were from our chamber standpoint.
Let's see. Trying to close this out.
Oh, let's try that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Okay, this is going to be very short and quick because as I said, I wanted this to be mostly from these two folks. But I do have a few remarks. As I said when I introduced myself, I'm Executive Director of Compliance and Policy Formation, but more specifically during the biennial legislative years, I also served for the Dallas County Community College District leadership, our chancellor, vice chancellors, the 7 college presidents and all the vice presidents. I'm responsible for doing impact analysis. So it's quite a task. One of the things that I do is from the first day of pre-filing. So last November 14th was the first day legislation could be pre-filed. Now, before I get into any of that, let me say that between sessions, the Lieutenant Governor, being over the Senate, creates what's called interim charges in anticipation of the next session. And the Speaker of the House also issues interim charges to committee chairs for, again, issues that need to be studied or looked at by a committee during the interim year period, the off legislative year. And so starting last March, April, all the way running through June, July, there were interim committee hearings in both the House and Senate. So that was really a precursor, gave you kind of an early warning sign of what was going to be potentially laying ahead for the 85th session. And one thing that I want to just kind of, out of all of that, one thing for this group to know is that based on a piece of legislation that passed during the 84th session had to do with dual credit. And basically it opened up dual credit up to that time had been limited to other than early college high schools, the regular dual credit was limited to the 11th and 12th graders. But with the passage of House Bill 18 in the 84th session, all limitations were taken away in dual credit, and so as soon as a student became a high school student, they were eligible to pursue dual credit, and there were no limits anymore as to the total credit hours. Well, the legislature, at least they can do basic multiplication and addition, so they figured out that in order to see the data related to the impacts from that 84th session, that the 85th session wouldn't be enough time because it will take 4 years for a ninth grader to move through the system. So they basically punted the ball, so to speak, until the 86th session to do anything related to dual credit if there needs to be any tweaking. So therefore, dual credit was kind of off the table for the 85th session. But we will see for interim charges next spring and summer, that's where we'll begin to get a hint of where they're going to try to go. So having said that, then from November 14th through May 29th, which is commonly called by those who are the legislators and those folks who watch legislation, it's called sine die. That means the end of the session. And 140 days. The 29th of May was Memorial Day, folks. And so those of us who were tracking legislation spent Memorial Day having fun on the computer watching the session end. Then the governor, by state constitutional law, is allowed 20 days from sine die to either approve, veto, or let stand without signature bills that were passed. And so out of the 251 bills that I sat and analyzed personally, by the end, there were 38 bills of high importance from the Dallas County Community College perspective with respect to our relationship to public K through 12, our relationship to ourselves as a community college, and our relationship with universities. And so some of these bills of those 38 are specific, where it's more the responsibility of the K through 12. Others in this list are the responsibilities of only community colleges, and others of these bills are more broad, impacting maybe all, or in a lot of cases, all of IHEs, institutions of higher education, public institutions of higher education. So, but the breakdown is this, and I had to do this analysis of which bills are we directly responsible for dealing with immediately, and which bills have to be set up by state agency rules first before we can do anything about it. So the breakdown is this: local responsibilities. Out of the House, there were 4 bills. Out of the Senate, 10, for a total of 14. And then under state agency rule requirement before local implementation, House has 10, the Senate has 14, for a total of 24. My simple math is 14 and 24 equals 38. So there's no time to talk about 38 separate bills. But the leadership of the council has the thumb drive with that information on it, and it's going to get posted on the website hopefully by tomorrow. So the posting of copies of each list can be accessed by going to our council's website, and there's the website. And once you see or print out both lists, I have provided a brief summary of each bill. And for those who wish to access a copy of a specific bill, note that each bill is hyperlinked. So by hovering over that bill number, you can right-click and it will take you directly to the bill itself through the Texas Legislature online, where you can find an upper tab that says text, and so you can actually print a copy of the entire bill. Now, Q&A. And we're running a little bit over, so I'm going to be kind of the stopwatcher here. Yes, right.
My question really is more of a comment than a question as well. One of the pieces of legislation that passed and impacts education here in North Texas is the election called for on November 7th about the Dallas County schools. I don't know if that was mentioned in the presentation. Unfortunately, I got it a little bit late. But that will have a big impact on the school districts here in Dallas County and even some outside of Dallas County, and has already had big impact on smaller districts in the region due to the legislative fight that happened in the push to have Dallas County schools only operate in Dallas County. So there is an election. Can anybody tell me, I've mentioned the date, when the next election is? November 7th. Tuesday, November 7th. For those of us who live in Dallas County, we'll have an opportunity to vote whether we're going to keep Dallas County schools or not. I will say that of the original districts that were served by Dallas County, most went up for RFP in the spring. In every case, Dallas County schools came back as the by far lowest bidder. And the savings in to the districts by not having to go out for a private bid, was millions. And there was one district that did decide to go against, or to choose a higher bidder. They're spending about $800,000 more per year to bring in a outside bidder. And it's interesting because about 15 at the last count of their drivers have left to go back to Dallas County schools elsewhere because they don't have benefits. And, well, they have some, but they have much more limited benefits. I hate to give you the political commercial, but for those of you who might not know, I recently accepted the challenge of being on the board of trustee with Dallas County Schools. So it'll be in either a few month long period or a 6-year period. But if you have any questions about it, I'm more than glad to talk to you. Unfortunately, the Dallas County Schools side doesn't have millions of dollars or any support to, I can talk more about that, but I want to say it in this group about one side or another. But I'll be glad to address that because that was passed at the legislature. And it is a bill that those of us in Dallas County can serve it. I'll say for those that are with the DISD has a perspective on that, some have. And I'll say be careful what you wish for. Because our estimate is that we're saving the district $14 million a year just in the straight up costs that we're servicing.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any particular questions of the panelists? Yes, Mary.
I was very interested, Lanet, in your analysis of the impact of Harvey on public education. I wonder, it's much harder to pull data together for higher ed, but I wonder if we have any analysis of the impact of Harvey on public higher education.
Yeah, so I honestly do not have the same level of analysis, kind of like what you said, because it's not, I think, oh, yeah, I got it too thick. It's not as specific where we have the state and things like that, but definitely we've already seen our North Texas universities bringing in students. Yeah, just things like even seeing on Twitter, so many of our institutions I've been really proud of, honestly, have extended deadlines and welcomed and helped and understood that these students are coming with nothing, because still systems like University of Houston and others are seeing really large capital issues where their buildings are still flooded and things like that. But I agree with you. I think that analysis needs to be done as the best that we can. Truly look at.
One of the interim charges that's already been issued by Speaker Strauss is to look at the impact of Harvey. And I'll have to go back and look at it to see if it's looking at both public ed and higher ed, but I wouldn't be surprised. But it's getting a lot of attention, and I think you will have that opportunity to hear that impact as they're still really in recovery mode, and so really when they move to impact mode, we should know more.
Yeah, we, in the Dallas Community Colleges, we've only seen a few this semester. We're anticipating actually an increase in spring enrollment. People are trying to just get their lives together right now. They're trying to figure out just a place to live, even temporarily, because, guests in a home are kind of like fish,
But the impact has to be the same.
Right,
I mean, in terms of facilities, in terms
Right,
of
so-
impact of students, in terms of cost.
Right.
In terms of loss of instruction, which is one of the things we didn't even really talk about. There's a number of those districts that have lost 2, if not 4 weeks of instruction.
Right.
And Commissioner Morath already announced that he's not going to delay the tests, at least at the moment. He's not going to delay the state schedule. So loss of instruction is a really serious problem.
Yeah. Again, a fair amount of distance learning courses will be an option, through universities, community colleges, in-state, out-of-state, whatever. Yes.
Again, in keeping with Harvey, I've heard some talk about people saying that maybe the state might be able to tap its rainy day fund for the rainy day we just had. How would they go about doing that with the legislature not being in session?
It's an interesting question, Ray. The governor has said a number of times that he has the ability to access those funds without the legislature, and we're going to have to see how that plays out. Certainly, if there has been a rainy day in recent Texas history, that the October Harvey is it. You certainly have already heard some conversation from folks who are defending the fact that they didn't use the rainy day fund in the previous session. That was that now they're glad they didn't use it, and that it has accessible. There have been several conversations, and I think we're going to have to see how that plays out. But the governor feels like he has some authority to do some of those short-term things, at least without the session. And then obviously he could call a special session if they really felt like they needed it.
Yeah, just again, for our recall purposes, you know, it was in the 84th session where, you know, I think it was 84th, where the rainy day funds were set aside. Was that 83rd?
83rd.
83rd. So, you know, right off the top, you know, rainy day funds now go for transportation and water for the state. And so, you know, we go into these sessions now with close to, what is it, $5 billion?
Right.
$5 billion already dedicated out of rainy day fund money. So that makes a difference now.
Barbara has.
What would you say, if you look at the legislative session and the decisions made, how would you say those connect to particular initiatives that the state has come forward with, either through the coordinating board or other kinds of things? And have you seen support for some of these initiatives? Like, say, for example, support that you see coming from the legislature for the 60 by 30, or some of these other kinds of things. What, have you seen that, and what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that a strategy that we actually had when we were forming our legislative agenda was making sure everything was applicable to 60 by 30, because we understood that that is the state goal. That is what our state has chosen to buy into. And so we need to make sure that everything we're doing is working towards that, because that's what the legislature is looking at as well. That's kind of the plan that they're looking at, saying, okay, this is the goal. How does this apply? So absolutely, that was something that we saw. And I think that's why transfer was a huge issue, because rather than closing the gaps, that was more about access. 60 by 30 is about completion. And transfer is a huge piece of completion. So we did see that. And honestly, I mean, over a year ago, when we were planning our strategy, it was, how do we make sure everything buckets under 60 by 30? So that way it also makes sense to legislatures, because they're like, oh, 60 by 30 means this, this.
Anything
So.
in particular, like, for example, anything you saw in particular, maybe discussion around funding that you saw particularly to support that effort? Can you think of?
Honestly, the whole conversation around funding was just defense. There wasn't even room to say, how can we get more money to reach 60 by 30? It was, please, please, please don't take it away. Like, totally honest.
Yeah.
Like, Barbara's lying, right? Yeah.
But I
It
do
was
think,
just-
I do think that the table got set a little bit when the governor, right after 60 by 30, back in 2016, when it first kicked in, he created charges for the tri-agency. That's true. TWC, TEA, and the coordinating board to host regional meetings to talk about it, and to kind of lay out a strategy. So I think that, you know, quite honestly, folks, we're among friends here. The truth is those three agencies have operated more on their own silos than cooperatively together. And I think this was where, you know, the bully pulpit, so to speak, of the governorship can help, because, you know, the main authority of our governors by Constitution is appointmentship to state commissions and that kind of thing. So, you know, they have to be kind of beholden to the governor. So the governor basically said, you know, tri-agency, y'all are gonna have to start working together better,
Which is great.
you know? So,
I don't think we saw that alignment on the public ed side, to be honest. The issues that really, again, were defensive. They were trying to fix the public school finance system and add more money, trying to defend against the bathroom bill, trying to defend against accountability issues, changing A through F, defending against losing the pre-K dollars. So Commissioner Morath certainly has a strategic plan that he is following at TEA that has some of those key issues, some educator prep and educator effectiveness, but very few of those bills made it through the system on the public ed side because the issues were so big and so divisive on that end.
Right.
So I don't think you can see that we saw that cohesiveness from a planned state on the public ed side.
and one thing y'all need to be mindful of is higher education. All of public higher education is discretionary funding. At least K through 12, it's under court order requirements. You know, you got the health system under federal requirements. You have your prisons and jails under various federal requirements. And so basically, after the state kind of meets all those requirements, then what's left over are the crumbs, so to speak, of the budgetary system, allocation system for higher education. And so, you know, that's where we too have seen the pullback from state responsibility for funding of higher education. And that's the reason why this whole tuition issue, now the legislators are mad and upset at the universities for continuing to raise their tuition when it's their own dang fault, you know? So anyway, I think we need to call a halt to this so that Christina can do a wrap up.
Let me quickly give you a shameless plug. We gave you a flyer for next Wednesday on the 27th. We're having our annual State of Public Education program that does feature Commissioner Morath as the keynote, and then we're highlighting innovations from 3 local school districts, from Dallas ISD, from Richardson ISD, and then International Leadership of Texas, which is a major charter school network in the Dallas area. And so we have the opportunity to offer any of our education partners to attend at the member price. It's still, I know, is big because it's in a big hotel, but if you would like to come and join us, you can go to our website and register and participate in that.
Cool.
Yeah. And sorry,
Go ahead.
lastly, we don't have a flyer for yet, but on November 28th at the Chamber, we're going to be hosting a luncheon. It's a lot lower key than State of Public Ed, where we'll be having Elizabeth Sobel-Blum from the Federal Reserve Bank and Garrett Groves from the Center of Public Policy Priorities come and talk about a report that they had about workforce ecosystems and how education, workforce, nonprofit partners can all come together to create better regional talent pipelines. And so, like I said, that's a much more casual event at the Chamber. And if you're interested in that, let me know. So,
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you
us. We
very much.
appreciate it.